Story 1. Cold Blood. Well, here goes. I guess you could call this my last will. Although that isn't really what it is, I'd say. It's more of a confession than anything. But honestly, I'm not really even sure if what I am writing is true or not. I grew up as a normal kid. Decent neighborhood with loving parents. My dad worked at the local plant and my mom was a school teacher. We lived a normal life, did what most families did. Nothing out of the ordinary. I really can't remember how or when it started. Almost out of the blue. Own thing wasn't right, no. There was no monsters or ghosts, but my father really started to act strange. He would start coming home late, drunk and angry. One night it was far worse than the rest. Like all other nights, he was drunk, of course. He came through the door mumbling about something I couldn't really understand. I ignored him, like I usually did, and locked myself in my room. He seemed to have calmed down, so I went out into the kitchen to get something to eat. There she was, lying on the floor motionless in a pool of her own blood. She was clearly dead. I couldn't find my father anywhere. He just seemed to vanish. Months went by and my father was still never found. I went to live with my grandparents in the town over. Everything started to go back to normal. Well, as normal as it could be after you find your mother, after your father bludgeoned her to death. Nevertheless, I started making new friends and got back into a normal routine. A few years, Pa said, and the image of my mother's bloody body started to slip away. It could have been that I was really forgetting it, or it could be all the meds the psychiatrist had me on. Either way, I didn't care. I just wanted that horrible picture out of my mind for good. Soon, I had graduated from high school and moved away to college. It was nice to finally be on my own and far away from the memoir of my past. I still sit up wondering how much different my life would have been if my parents were still around, but I guess there is nothing I can do about that now. Freshman year went by like nothing. It was actually pretty boring. Nothing too eventful ever really happened. I was happy for once. The beginning of my sophomore year, however, wasn't all that ordinary. I started having horrible dreams, but they just didn't feel like dreams. They felt too real and as if I was actually there. Most dreams were the same. Someone would be walking through the woods until they are attacked by someone. The attacker looked very familiar, but I could never really put my finger on it. The worst part is that I would never wake up during the nightmares. I had to watch every grueling second of the murder. This guy, whoever it was, had no sense of remorse as he plunged the blade into his prey time after time. Most mornings I would wake up sweating and out of breath and just brush it off as a bad dream. That was until the disappearances started to happen. A few girls had gone missing off of campus. This stuff usually happens. Girls get drunk at a party and go home with a guy and later return the next night. Nobody thought they would actually find bodies. They canceled classes for a few days, which I wasn't against. It gave me some time to relax and get those horrible dreams out of my mind. It had been a few weeks since I had any dreams or anyone had gone missing. I thought everything had gone back to normal. Classes started back up, and everyone started to forget the murders. The scumbag was never found, and they just assumed he was a drifter that simply got bored and moved along. The dreams, they came back, of course, but this time I didn't wake up in my bed with my pajamas on. I woke up in the middle of the forest, behind my dorm covered in blood. It was still rather early, and the sun had just started to come up, so I had time to get back to my room without anyone noticing me. I have no idea what happened that night or why there was blood covering my clothes. All I can remember is that horrible dream. This time it was more vivid. It was as if I was the attacker. I remember her face, too, the looks of pure agony and fright. I will never forget it. That morning I went into the cafeteria to get some food while trying to piece together what had happened. The last night, for some reason, there were a few police officers and detectives questioning students. I didn't think much of it until they questioned me. They showed me a picture. I couldn't bail. Keep my eyes. It was the girl from my dream the night before. I was at a loss for words. I couldn't help but stutter and slur my words. That's when they asked to search my room. I, of course, cooperated because I didn't think they'd find anything. After a few minutes of turning my room upside down, they still hadn't found whatever they were looking for. That was until they searched the CL faucet. I don't know if I half expected them to find something or if I wanted them to find something. Hidden in the ceiling underneath one of the tiles was a knife covered in blood. I couldn't believe my eyes. Was I the killer? Were all of the dreams real? I said nothing as they cuffed me and read me my rights. My nightmare were coming true. Nah, it has been a few months since it all happened. It went to trial. Those were the worst days of my life. I just wanted to die. Every single picture they showed me was of a person that was in my dream. In total, they linked me to 10 different murders. I don't remember a single one. My psychiatrist testified for me and got me put in a mental asylum instead of the maximum security prison. She said finding my mom murdered had such an impact on my subconscious that I committed those horrible murders without even knowing it. I remember learning on TV that most serial killers don't feel remorse for what they had done. Every night I lay awake wishing I could have taken it all back. I am a monster. I wish they gave me the death penalty. Today my father visited me at the hospital. I tried telling the nurses and security guard that he was the one who had killed my mother. When I was a child, they all looked at me as if I were crazier than they had initially thought. Son, my father said, we go over this every single time I come to see you. You were the one who murdered her so many years ago. I couldn't believe my ears. Who does this man think he is coming here lying and trying to pin her murder on me? I can't believe he would do this to me. What a fucking coward. Finally, I had convinced my shrink at the hospital to let me see my file. I felt as if my eyes were deceiving me. My father was right. I murdered my own mother when I was 14 and was admitted into a mental hospital until I was 18. My grandparents, they never existed. They had died long before I was even born. I was never in college. I was nothing more than a crazed drifter who settled down in a college town for a few months while I killed those girls. My mind somehow made up the stories to cope with what I had done. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be a serial killer or a murderer. I never meant to hurt anyone. That's why I must end this. It's kind of ironic how someone that in his conscious mind would never even harm a fly murdered 11 people in cold blood. I have to kill myself before I hurt anyone else. Today I woke up covered in blood again. Story 2. Bits and pieces. If you are interested in the weird and wonderful, then you might already be familiar with the strange case of the used mummies. discovered in 2001. The mummified remains of two ancient residents of the Scottish Isle, ND of South US, have perplexed and puzzled archaeologists ever since they were unearthed. Buried deep in the ground of that remote corner of the developed world, the most recent scientific data estimates that both corpses were placed there over 3,000 years ago. Their skeletons were found to have been contorted into an unnatural fetal position, and the photos, which appeared in the national newspapers at the time, were enough to make anyone uneasy. It was said that such a deliberately manipulated pose was common in ancient burials. But it was clear during those first few weeks of the excavation that one of those individuals was anything but common. Initially, the archaeologists exhuming the bodies placed great importance on the burials being the first concrete indication that the ancient peoples who once populated the British Isles mummified their dead. This has created quite a stir in the academic community ever since, as the hunt continues as we speak to find the estimated hundreds, if not thousands, of similarly preserved dead ancients dotting the land beneath our feet. After some preliminary tests were performed on the corpses, it became apparent that both bodies had been immersed for at least a year in an acidic material shortly after death. This led to the speculation that they had both been mummified by being steeped in a nearby peat bog, a blackened, swamp-like piece of wetland formed via centuries of accumulating rotting plants and animals for some time before being left above ground, perhaps to be paid tribute to or act as a warning to others for hundreds of years for some hideous crime. Both bodies had been remarkably well preserved, and it was estimated by the archaeological team on hand that they had perhaps been stored in a primitive hut or house structure for much of their time above ground. Why this occurred is anyone's guess, but it has been argued that the bodies were of ceremonial importance and had perhaps a priest class lived alongside the seemingly immortalized bodies for an unknown ritualistic purpose before finally concealing them in a stone coffin made of uneven slabs beneath the ground, not before removing a tooth from each jaw and placing them in the palms of their rotting clenched fists, a curious practice indeed. The fact that the steeping of the bodies in the peat bog had led to the preservation of both corpses excited the researchers. They believed that there was every possibility that some DNA might have been protected from thousands of years of rotting beneath the earth. This could be used to trace the ancestry of the individuals, and so the difficult process of extracting genetic material from any remaining flesh began. It was during this process that one of the scientists, a Dr. Greeley, noticed something amiss with one of the cadavers. How something so obvious could have been initially overlooked was the source of much debate amongst the research team, but there seemed to be no doubt. One of the mummified corpses was composed of body parts from a number of once living individuals. At first this was assumed to be pure chance, that perhaps the area had been an ancient cemetery housing numerous bodies and had become a mixed bag of bits and pieces as they rotted, tossed around by the elements above and below ground level. This, however, was vehemently denied by Dr. Greeley. She was absolutely convinced that the mummified body was deliberately cobbled together from various corpses for some unknown reason. Regardless of who was correct, the research team concluded unanimously that the body was mostly out of a 40-year-old man, with at the very least an arm, part of a leg, and a few DS coming from other sources, with the jawbone and lower teeth coming from an elderly woman. DNA identification of other body parts was, unfortunately, impossible. Drive Greeley initially argued that the remains must have been pieced together in a ritual where body parts were offered to the whole skeleton for some reason, perhaps as a way to cement alliances or lay claim to land where the man was buried. But as Drive Greeley's investigation became more time-consuming, so too did the outlandish nature of her claims increase. After poring over the data and performing her own tests on the corpse for several months, she petitioned the academic research team that she was part of to publish her conclusions. There was much resistance within the group, and it was decided that Dr. Greeley had either lost her mind or was not the excellent researcher that they had believed her to be. She was suspended from the research project for an indefinite period and asked to rethink her assertions. But she would not, not let them go before she was escorted from the laboratory where the mummified remains were being stored. She was informed of the proposals to remove her from the project by a sympathetic colleague. With little time to act, Dr. Greeley gathered up all of her research notes and pocketed a shard of bone that she had removed from just above the corpse's rotten knee joint before the head of the research team entered the laboratory with a security guard and asked her to leave the premises immediately. Racked by guilt at their colleague's dismissal, 2 members of the research team maintained contact with Dr. Greeley over the following 4 months, exchanging emails and even some ideas about the origins of the corpse. They all sympathized with Dr. Greeley's predicament, although they never would back up her conclusions publicly. They just seemed so outrageous, even though the evidence did indeed suggest that she was correct in her beliefs. No one was willing to put their arm to a paper stating that the corpse, that 3,000-year-old cobbled-together collection of bones from different bodies, had at one time walked about, lived as a single functioning human being. No, while Dr. Greeley had found overwhelming evidence that the bones had been attached to one another by cartilage, tendons, and muscle, there must have been some bizarre contamination of the results. It just couldn't be true. And so Drive Greeley was on her own, and on her own she stayed. But while some amongst her ex-research colleagues claimed she was quite mad, she didn't seem delusional. She didn't, for example, run to the press. No, she valued her career as a scientist and made it clear during conversations that she had to make sure that her conclusions were irrefutable. Only then would she go public. It was for that reason she sank all of her money, time, and resources into finding another burial site on the island of South Uist. If she couldn't gain access to that bizarre corpse, she would find her own to study to hopefully support her hypothesis. Drive Greeley hired a team of historians to help her identify locations which potentially contained early Bronze Age settlements. Those areas were then assessed at great cost by a freelance geophysical survey team, probing the ground for possible chambers or stone coffins hidden beneath, keeping those she was closest to abridged of her progress. It appeared that she had indeed finally found another burial site, and was confident that its construction matched those of T. At strange pieced together individual which had been dragged out of the ground on the previous dig, having spent most of her savings just to find such a place. She did not have enough money left to employ a group of archaeologists to help her excavate any remains which might have been found there. For this reason, Dr. Greeley began the hard work of digging for proof. The phone calls and emails that she sent to her colleagues diminished over time, and it did indeed seem that she was slowly succumbing to a debilitating mental illness, ranting about bits and pieces, walking about at night, disturbing my work. 2 months later, the dismembered and decapitated body of a woman was found floating in the Clyde River. The body was identified as belonging to Dr. Greeley, but it was argued that that was impossible. Dr. Greeley had been missing for only several weeks, but the forensic investigation into the remains suggested that the body had been submerged in a peat bog for at least a year. Story 3. The Lost. This is a creepypasta success story, a story that was rewritten with the feedback received on creepypasta and accepted for the main site. You can see the creepypasta posting for this story here. The Lost. My name is Claire, and I'm from a small country in Central Europe. Many people have probably never heard of it. My country has everything from a small coastline on the Adriatic Sea to the majestic Alps, but most of the landscape consists of small green hills, each with a little church on top. Almost 2/3 of my country is covered with forests, and the capital is famous for its Middle Age architecture. It is a beautiful country where, most of the time, nothing unusual happens. Like most people here, I live in the countryside where my nearest neighbor is almost a quarter of a mile away. I spent most of my childhood running around the forest right by my home. I can still remember where the best trees for climbing are and where certain flowers grow. Something happened there in the summer of 2001 I will never forget. I was around 12 years old, and I had decided to spend my whole afternoon alone in the forest. As I sigh, most of the country is covered in hills, and the hill behind our house is quite steep. At the top of this hill is an old orchard my great-grandfather planted, and from it you can almost see the capital city in the distance. My forest extends from the orchard across the karst landscape and almost right to the Italian border. There are a few smaller towns and villages between my home and the board, but I never really went very far from the area my family owned. On this particular day, though, I decided to explore some of the areas I had never been before. I really didn't take anything with me, and I didn't bother telling my parents where I was going. I always felt very safe in the woods, even though bears were often seen in the area. In reality, the most dangerous thing you would normally come across were drunken hunters. The forest is pretty in the summer, and the leaves and tall trunks made me feel like I was in a big cathedral. I started to sing a tune I had heard on the radio, and before long, I was about an hour and a half walking distance from home. At this point, I decided to stray off the main road that leads through the forest. I'm not sure how much time passed, but I suddenly realized that the sun was starting to set and the light was making the leaves glow in sharp colors. Soon I found myself wandering and the twilight in an area I did not know. The wind blowing through the dry branches was making very eerie noises, and I suddenly knew I was lost. I could feel my panic beginning to rise, and the adrenaline started to flow through my veins. My instincts were screaming to run away, but I forced myself to remain calm and tried to figure out the way back to the main road. It was pointless. I had no idea where I was. I started to walk around aimlessly, hoping to find a road or at least a path I could follow. Suddenly I saw a figure standing in the distance, and from its size it had to be a child. I started to walk towards it, but the child seemed to notice me and ran away. I chased after it through the forest for quite a long time, but I could never quite get close enough to actually distinguish any of its features. But it seemed to be a young girl no older than I was at the time. As I was running after the mysterious girl, the ground suddenly gave way beneath me. I experienced that dreadful feeling of falling, like in very bad nightmare where time seems to slow down and everything is in slow motion. Then came the awful sound of my body hitting the ground, and pain erupted through me. For a moment I lay motionless on the ground, trying to catch my breath. Finally I pulled myself together and opened my eyes, waiting for them to adjust to the thick darkness in the cave where I had landed at first. Everything was pitch black, but then I began to be able to see. There was a single pair of eyes staring at me just a few inches in front of my face. I quickly backed away until I hit something Dr. Y.N. crumbly. Somewhere in the back of the cave a light suddenly flared to life. First there was one, and then more and more, until the chamber was fully lit. There were thousands and thousands of eyes watching me, dead, dull eyes in dry sockets, faces whose skin was desiccated and stretched over their skulls. Their mouths hung open, their lips having rotted and pulled back so that it looked as if they were all screaming in rage or terror. I stared. I wasn't able to move or scream. I am not even sure I was able to breathe. I blinked, hoping that the dreadful image in front of me would disappear. As I opened my eyes, it seemed as if all the corpses had moved. I never saw them move, but each time I blinked it was like they had gotten one step closer. I felt cold sweat dripping down my neck, and my eyes began to itch and water as I tried to keep them open. I couldn't help myself, and I blinked again. This time, as my eyes opened, I was completely surrounded. I simply closed my eyes, hoping this was all just a bad dream. I didn't hear a single sound, and I smiled, thinking that I would soon wake up in my own bed. When I opened my eyes, I was face to face with it. I could clearly see the dried and rotten face, eyes dim and lifeless. I started to feel dizzy and sick, and then it seemed as though I could feel something like bony hands and fingers grabbing my hair and tearing at my clothes. I felt it, and then again I didn't feel it. I was so overcome with terror I could no longer tell what was real and what wasn't. I tried so hard to stop my conscience to fight, but I couldn't move a single muscle. Then the lights suddenly went out, and it was pitch black all around me. I opened my eyes, trying to adjust to the lack of light. I was lying on the forest floor, not far from my home. At that moment my body started to function normally, and I ran home as fast as I could. I had no idea how I had gotten there, and I just wanted to forget about what had happened. I was so happy to be home and safe, but my peace didn't last very long. The next night I had a dream about the people I had seen in the cave. I woke with a start and saw a face looking at me through the window. In the moonlight, the features of the face were much easier to make out than they had been in the darkness of the cave. It was the face of a young girl. She was dead, and her empty eyes stared at me with wild anger as she clawed the window trying to get in. Since then I have had the same nightmare of the girl clawing to get through my window every night. It has been 12 years now, and in that time I have gone to many different therapists. They tell me it is just stress from school and work, and that I should try to relax. How can I relax when every night I am afraid to open my eyes for fear that she will be there trying to get to me? It is a known fact that right after World War II the communists took over the government, and thousands of people who refused to cooperate with the new system were killed. Men and women were walled up alive in abandoned mines or shot and buried in mass grave sites. Some of them were part of my family. Our government still refuses to talk about this, and almost none of the people responsible were ever punished. Story 4. Rats. Every old house is bound to have a few rats. Right, Bob H.T. The old house. The year I graduated from college, it was startlingly cheap for such a big house. 2 stories, multiple bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, conveniences that seem luxuries after my NY college dorm. It was a very nice house, despite being located in the middle of nowhere. Because I had lived in a fairly large city for the majority of my life, the silence at the house was by far the worst thing about it. I was used to the hum of the city, the constant drone of cars outside my window. Here the nights were torture. The silence was louder than anything I had ever heard before. In my first week at the house, I threw away my old wall clock because its ticking, in the absence of any other noise, was so loud it was apt to drive me crazy. This turned out to be a bad decision. The ticking was annoying, but it was at least a distraction from the other noises. I convinced myself every time the noises could be attributed to rustle of the wallpaper, a branch against a window, or the standard hums and bumps of an old house. I wouldn't admit even to myself that the noises did freak me out. That's probably wool. The rats were, at least at first, a convenient excuse. It was unreasonable to expect a vermin-free home in the middle of a forest, of course. But there were a lot of rats. I first noticed them when I opened a cupboard after my first trip to the store in the nearby town. I tried to put a loaf of bread in the cupboard, and I was greeted by 3 huge rats, staring blankly at me with beady eyes. After that, I found more rats around, several in the basement, a few scuttling around the porch steps, the patter of their tiny paws in the attic, even a big gray one in my bedroom. Naturally, I purchased a few rat traps, which seemed to help the problem quite a bit. A few days after, I got a cat, too. A small, scraggly creature I bought for $10 in a Walmart parking lot. So on. My new cat became so efficient at catching the rats that I no longer felt the need to purchase rat traps every few trips to the store. Though I never really liked animals, I began to grow close to that cat. I even started calling him Tom, which I believed to be a suitable name for a cat. It would have been perfectly easy to feel content at that point. I was settling into my new home nicely. Tom was a good cat, and the vermin problem was under control. The only problem was that the noses hadn't stopped. They did quiet down for a while, just enough to explain them away. When I heard scratching, I would pat Tom between the ears and tell him he must have missed a rat or two. When I was sure something scraped against the window, it was probably just a limb on the tree outside. Once I thought I heard something moving in the basement. I asked myself what Tom could have been doing down there. Never mind that I had just seen Tom walk into the kitchen. There was always an excuse. Usually, I blamed it on the rats. After a few weeks, Tom wasn't bringing dead rats to the doorstep anymore. I always patted him on the head and told him he'd just had bad luck I didn't. To let myself think that the cat had killed all of them. Oh, no. Then it would be harder to explain the noises. Looking back, I suppose what started it was Tom pawing at the door, wanting out. It was late, and that cat had never wanted out at night before. I assumed he had seen a rat or some other small creature outside, so I let him out and went back to bed. Not long after, I heard a relentless scratching nose outside my window. It was a harsh, scraping nose, not unlike fingernails on a chalkboard. I turned over and tried to get back to sleep, but the nose continued. Finally, I got up and went to look outside and see what the problem was. Something had its face pressed against the glass. It stayed there for just a second, but the fleeting image was enough. That sight will haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. Its face was long and as white as bone. It had no eyes, but a red light seemed to burn deep within the pits in its skull. Black veins ran over its head, crisscrossing and bulging. The rest of its body was covered in a thick black fur. Then it was gone. Once I had time to think on it, the creature was made even more horrifying by the fact that my room and, of course, my window were on the house's second floor. After it left, the sheer reek of it finally hit me. The whole night was filled with the smell of the thing, despite the fact it never entered my home. To my knowledge, the smell was sour and rotting, making me want to vomit. I staggered back from the window, petrified by both the sight and the stench. I cupped my hands to my nose, my eyes watering and my legs shaking so hard I could barely stand. I spent the rest of the night locked in my bathroom, a knife clutched in my hand, doubting what I had seen. When morning came, the light gave me the courage to go outside. I remembered that I had let my cat outside, and I went around the house calling for him. It didn't take me long to find H.M. I won't go into detail, but poor Tom didn't even look like a cat anymore. I wanted to bury him, but the smell of the creature was all around him, and to be honest, I didn't think I could get very close. I was scared, and I was angry. This thing had killed my cat and taken away any hope of a quiet, safe life here. Not knowing what else to do, I went to the police. I wasn't hopeful they would do anything, but I knew I had to try. I was angry with their reactions, though I knew I would have reacted the same way. They didn't offer any help with my problem, and only told me that if I didn't like it, I should sell the house. I drove home in a rage, intent on doing just that. I planned to put the house up for sale that very night. Let some other guy deal with that thing I never got to. My house, the thing was in my driveway. In the light of day, I could see its clawed hands. Huge, long paws with claws the size of my entire hand. It crouched on all fours, and though I was still a fair way from it, I could make out the expression on its face. I watched as it tilted its head to the side, and I could have sworn it grinned at me. Naturally, I put my car in reverse with the intentions of never returning to that house again. As I drove away, I could hear it scream, loud, almost scarily inhuman. I got a new house and tried my hardest to forget. I didn't tell anyone who would believe me. All I said was that I found a good deal on a house in the city, not untrue, and that the house in the woods was just too quiet for my liking. My new home is close to the city. It's not as quiet here, but it's undeniably more peaceful. I won't deny that I still see that thing in my dreams, but I'm happy here. I got a new cat, one that seems even more friendly than Tom was. I even found a job so I can work nights, so that I never have to fear that thing staring at me in the darkness. I won't deny that sometimes I do hear noises, a scuffle in the basement, a rustle outside the window, once or twice, even what seemed like scratching outside. But after all, every old home is bound to have a few rats. Story 5. Fog Children. Staring at the clock, Brandon heaved a sigh as the digital numbers switched once again, marking the death of yet another minute. As he sat outside the Sun Theater waiting for his girlfriend to get off her shift at the Flying Saucers bar, the gently humming engine of the older model Dodge filled the air, along with a soft mist that was coming from the nightly rainfall. The city of San Antonio had suffered from these strange heat waves before, but never these heat showers. It would rain just after the sun went down, which in the summer was late, cooling the hot streets to quickly creating a thick fog that the people of the Southwest were hardly equipped to deal with. Brandon flipped his headlights off and rolled up his windows, locking his doors out of habit. With the fog rolling in, you never knew what kind of crap you were going to see. There'd been reports on the news that gangs of teenagers had been using the clouds as a means to carjack people, sneaking up on them, and just yanking them from their vehicle. Brandon smiled. No way that would happen to him. A sudden knocking on his window caused him to jump in his seat, dropping his cell phone down to the floorboards. Cursing under his breath, he looked up to see who had knocked on his window. 2 young boys stood in the pale light of the Sun Theater's glow, clothes immaculate. Brandon watched as the taller boy, the one on the GT, motioning for him to roll down the window. The boy on the left was smiling, his glistening white teeth luminescent in the rolling fog. Brandon stared at the kids for a few moments, looking them over. He knew all the movies at the Sun were starting up or were on their last round, and there was no way they were going to be interested in the bar. In fact, they were of that delightful age where Brandon couldn't exactly tell how old they were. They were somewhere between 10 and 14, and lanky. They had red curly hair and freckles, while the one on the left was dressed in an old video game t-shirt. The one on the right was wearing his Sunday best. As the fog licked at their edges, making them indistinct, Brandon rolled his window down a few inches. "Yeah, what do you kids need?" Brandon asked, trying to sound friendly. The one on the right folded his arms behind his back and teetered slightly to lean on his right foot. "Well, sir, we were coming to the movies to see the new action film, and we realized we left our wallets at home." The boy on the left nodded, eyes still not meeting Brandon's, as he kept twitchily looking around. Brandon nodded, urging the boy to continue. So you thought you might get some random adult to fork over some cash for you too? Brandon asked, reaching down to pat for his cell phone, the fog roll over his hood, obscuring the chipped paint and warped metal from view. From the light of the sun's marquee, the two young boys' shadows split into three distinct lines stretching out over the car as they stood by silently watching Brandon fumble the bow on the right's. Head drooped. I wasn't planning on asking you for money. Not at all. We just want a ride. See? The other boy nodded, his smile widening even further. A ride, Brandon repeated, not bothering to look at the boys as he watched them from within the dark car's interior. A ride where? Well, that depends on you actually, the boy said, now standing directly outside the window of the Dodge. Brandon jolted, looking up as he tried not to spaz about the boy's sudden movement. Looking up through the inch slit of glass at the boy's silhouette, Brandon blinked. Had he been that tall? What do you mean? Brandon asked, looking at the darkened figure as it peered down at him. The boy. No, the man that stood there seemed to lengthen and grow as he peered down with shadowed eyes. His clothes were no longer church perfect. No, they were tousled and dirty. The skin that was apparent was blocked by fleck, as of fog dancing over him. Brandon stared up at the figure for what felt like minutes, until he heard it. Click. The figure had tried to open his front door. That seemed to break the spell. The tea had fallen over Brandon, snapping his gaze away from the shadow figure while rolling his window up as quickly as he could. As it sealed in place, Brandon thought he could hear an angry hiss of a serpent being denied its dinner. A palm slammed into the window, the fingers impossibly long and willow-thin to be that of a child or even a normal human being. Come on, mister, the boy's voice implored from the fog all around him, a dark humor underlying the plea. The ride would be quick. We just need a lift a couple miles. Get the fuck away from me, Brandon shouted, flipping on the headlights for his Dodge so he might have some chance of finding his phone. Standing in front of his Suburban were dozens of black forms, all thin as reeds with mirrored eyes of inky darkness, partially wrapped in tendrils of fog bouncing the brilliant lights of the Dodge back into the cab. Brandon screamed and dropped to the floorboards as his Suburban started to shake, the heavy steel exterior scraping as innumerable fingernails pry and pulled at the edges of the Dodge in search of an easy opening. The voice of the boy, now seemingly from everywhere, was growing deeper by the second, a thick, gravelly baritone that was commanding Brandon to open the door. This isn't happening, Brandon said to himself as he turned on his hands and knees to face the sea. His eyes never leaving the floor. This can't be real. He heard the handles being depressed and repressed in and out on all four doors repeatedly, and let out another scream when something climbed up on top of the vehicle. Looking up, Brandon could see the skylight open, wisps of fog sinking in like sinister fingers looking to pry a wound apart. Brandon climbed up onto his knees and slammed his fingers on the side panel, rolling the glass closed as he felt something shuffle about atop the vehicle. At the very last second, a hand dripping of darkness hit the glass at least smearing a greasy line that was only made that much more pronounced by the reflecting headlights. Brandon turned, eyes closed, and reached up to grab the keys, killing the engine with a silent pull, the lights dying along with the sounds. Sitting in the roomy space for his pedals, Brandon remained silent, as did the night. No voices, no cries, no scratching of nails on steel. His moment of peace was broken when his cell phone rang, violently and loudly, causing Brandon to yelp as he sought to silence it. "Hello?" he answered hesitantly. "Hey, baby," Rebecca said from the other line, weariness creeping from her voice. Brandon smiled. His girlfriend was calling him. He almost laughed. "Hey, honey," Brandon said, crawling up into the seat of his suburb and sticking the keys back into the ignition. The lights came on, shining over the parking lot and onto the front steps of the Sun. He saw his delicate little girlfriend standing there, holding, "Gee, a large cake. What have you got there?" "Oh, one of the cooks had a birthday and he's diabetic. They said I could have the cake. Figure it could be a reward for how well we've been doing on the bills." Rebecca smiled over the line, her tiny body walking out towards the Suburban. "Do me a favor and unlock the back, 'kay?" Brandon smiled and pulled the lever, unlocking the back gate, which lifted up slow enough to allow a breeze to breathe across the back of Brandon's neck. Brandon slowly started to choke as Rebecca's voice grew deeper, gravelly, all laughing over an increasingly staticky call, staring forward. A wave of fog rolled from beneath the Dodge, billowing like drapes caught in a wild wind as the feather-light claws of the dense mist danced over the hood and windshield, scratching like nails on a chalkboard. Story 6. Day of the Worm. What are dreams? What are they really? Are they bits and pieces of memories thrown together without ignore purpose? Do they whisper secrets of future days too? Come or hide secrets from days long past? Perhaps our soul is expelled from our bodies each night, thrust out into the void, traveling to vast lands and beyond the limits of our physical form. Consider this. Is it possible that our dreams are more than mere nonsense, but premonitions of adventures not yet had? Honestly, I don't have any answers for you. However, if I may, I would like to share with you what I do know. Tell me, have you ever had a dream you felt was so real your waking life felt distant and dull? Have you ever dreamt a dream that reveals glimpses of your full potential? Do you know of any dream that fills you with such sorrow upon awakening each morning to desire with all your might that your eyes will open to a brand new life, yet never does it come with every rising sun? That is the burden I bear. However, such sadness does not consume me, for I know my dreams are so much more than simple desires and wishful thinking. They are much more than you could possibly imagine. For you see, my dreams are preparing me for great things to come. I know that to be the truth. No, rolling your eyes does not offend me. You are not the first I've tried to tell. You are not first to have mocked my words. Most simply laugh out of amusement, and others feign looks of pity towards me. Truly, in their view, only a disadvantaged child would entertain such nonsense in their heads. They are the ones to pity, for they are only capable of seeing a land of make-believe, a fairy tale fabricated from the mind of a child so sure of themselves, that a child orphaned as an infant, who never knew the embrace of a mother's love or guidance of a father, could hold his head high, nor would they consider such a waif would earn his success with only the determination of his heart and by the strength in his hands. Yet I hold no malice, for their conclusions are not without logic, albeit sadly short-sighted. That is all about to change, for tomorrow is the day when all will be revealed. For tomorrow is my birthday, and when I am gone, they will have he no other choice but to admit they were wrong. Tomorrow is the day my dreams foretold. Before the sun sets on your 5 and 10th year of life, you shall return with hope and salve it. Iron on your back and light in your hands by your blade, you will rid the land of the worm. That is what I see every night when I surrender to sleep. Close your eyes and take my hand and let me tell you about my dreams. In my dreams, there's a realm so close to our own that only the width of a hair separates the two, existing side by side together and unaware of one another, yet they are so far apart that traveling the distance would take 1,000 years. It is a medieval realm where science and magic live next to each other as beloved friends. Machines and technology, sorcery and magic, they coexist side by side as is one. No difference comes to mind in matters of wizarding and engineering. Sorcerers and teachers, or even the healer and a doctor, this realm is ruled by 6 great nations, each under a king and queen of virtuous heart and noble blood. Castles and villages, farms and towns pepper the land. All live simplistic lives with a hint of technologies both not too raw and mystical. In my dreams, I see a beautiful domed temple made from ivory white stone. The temple is the home to 6 sacred weapons made of enchanted steel, one given to the Ak nation by a goddess. She offered these weapons in preparation for the day foretold, the day of the worm. The weapons are wielded by a warrior from each nation, each personally chosen by the gods, herself. But in the center of the temple, in the most revered spot, sits the 7th altar. Upon this altar rests the armor and weapons of the 7th son of a 7th son. Under the darkness of an eclipse of 3 moons, a child's bloodline emerged from the joining of a mortal and a god. This child's spirit will unite the realms in their darkest hour. The weapons are enchanted, steel of silver and blue, and my armor is impossibly light. My gauntlet is for my right hand and serves as my shield. It houses a disc that 3 blades emerge from with a snap. When flung, it obeys my will and lays waste to all of my foes. It then faithfully returns to my hand without fail every time. My sword was forged from the last remnants from creation and cooled with the very essence of life. It is the mortal enemy of rot and decay. It can never be broken. Nothing can shatter its blade, and it is impervious to impact. Never will its edge be dulled. The jewel in the hilt is my symbol and banner. It is the eye that shines a light that can ignite the passion of an oppressed people when hope had seemed to be lost. In my dreams I see a day in which black rain falls fro, and the sky viscous, ropey strands of greenish-black tar pour from the clouds. Anything it touches immediately begins to decay and corrode. The arrival of the worm is heralded by a clap of thunder as his fortress SS bursts through the clouds. It pierces the land like a dagger stabbed into flesh upon impact with the land. The castle of the worm is a jagged and pointed crystalline citadel with bulbous, blisterly domes upon it. This is the throne from where the worm will conquer and reign. The decay spreads from the dark fortress in the form of black mold and writhing masses of tentacles and tendrils, rotting everything it touches, except for one thing, the dead. Every warlord needs its pawns. The dead are absorbed and used as vessels for the worm's decay to take form. They are the eyes, the foot, and the iron fist of the worm fills its ranks with the deceased and slain flesh of the surrounding villages with a gluttonous appetite. The blisters from the walls of its fortress are released, and its army of decayed and mindless drones carry the smelly, rotting mass into the heart of all 6 nations. It will plant itself into the ground and become extensions of the mind and will of the worm. From here it will wage war against every man, woman, and child. It will fight with the decomposing faces of their neighbors, friends, brothers, and sisters. In my dreams, I see the goddess blessing the 6 kings from each of the nations before spiriting away the 7th set of armor and weapons from the walls of the vulnerable temple. She hides the items in a place far from the worm's reach, where they will wait until claimed by the child foretold to come. In a final act of sacrifice, I see the goddess exhausting the last of her immortality in order to open a door of light. She places a tiny infant within the entrance, and before closing the door she says, with tears in her eyes, "Goodbye, my beloved. Goodbye, my son." It is 20 minutes to midnight, the day of my 15th birthday. I sit on the wooden floor, and I am trembling next to a heated stove. I tremble not from the cold, but from a heart-gripping fear. However, make no mistake. Do not think for a moment I am trembling out of fear of the unknown or of things to come. I am not afraid of marching against a grotesque army of 1,000 rotting corpses. I don't fear the violence I will encounter or the many battles I will fight. I am not afraid. No, none of that scares me. I want the life so much. Do you want to know what really scares me? What has me filled with such terror and dread? What scares me the most is this. I am so afraid that when tomorrow finally arrives, it will come and go like any other ordinary day. Story 7. Don't go into the basement, you know, Mom. I remember now how it all started. It was right after moving to the new house. How old was I? 4, maybe 5. I was so young, so innocent, so unsuspecting. The new house was beautiful. Mom, do you remember how I used to run from room to room? You always laugh so hard when you recount those times. We were so happy. All of us. The house was so big, much bigger than the old house. This one had 2 floors. The main floor had the living room and 3 bedrooms, Judy's, Dad's and yours, and my bedroom at the end of the hall. Do you remember what I used to tell you about the basement, though? I always told you to not go into the basement. You would brush it off, wave away my fears. You probably don't remember me telling you at all. But I remember. I can ever forget. It all started with going downstairs on my own. A few times when I would go down there to get something, I would see things moving. Small black things in the corners, on top of the TV cabinet, in the hallway, in the laundry room, anywhere. They would move in and out of the corner of my eye. This would cause me to dash into the half-dimmed room and scurry upstairs. I remember one Emmy Judy commented, "Oh, Kelsey's scared again." I was scared of these beings, Mom. I was so scared. When you sent me down into the darkness alone, I feared for my life. I never knew what would happen when I was down there. I got to the point that I never went anywhere without turning a light on. A light switch would always be switched before going in any room, and then a frightening back upstairs. But I also didn't want anyone to know I was afraid. I hid my fear the best I could. Mom, that was until seeing wasn't the worst part. It was not long after I began seeing them that I started hearing them, saying things in hushed whispers, mocking me, snickering, moving objects in the basement. The small noises meant nothing to you and the rest of the family. You could turn your back to the sounds, you close your eyes to the unknown living in your house. I remember this one time. You found a handkerchief waiting for you on your bed. You laughed it off. You all laugh it off. The handkerchief didn't belong to any of us, and it was just waiting there for you, almost like a warning. But you all thanked the beings for their kind gift, making a mockery and a joke out of it. Mom, why didn't any of you listen to me when I told you to stop? By the time I was 8, the voices were a constant occurrence in the house. I could hear every word they said. These tours, which I called the whispers, talked about everything. They talked about new things to do to be nuisances, how much we amused them, how best to hurt the family living in their house. I had learned from you to put these things behind me and ignore them. But that became harder and harder. I remember one night, laying in my bed, I heard the door creep open. I hadn't been able to sleep well, so small noises jerked me up in the middle of the night quite often. But the whispers never moved objects so carelessly. They knew I was awake, and they knew the best way to frighten me, Lou. Movements were heard from the kitchen, and to save myself, I flung the blankets over my head. I wanted to cry for you like a toddler, Mom, but I didn't want to put you in harm. I heard a yelp from the kitchen. It was soft enough that no one else would be awoken from it. I know if you ever read this, Mom, you'll yell at me for being so stupid. But I had to see what was in the kitchen. I had to know what evil was preying on my family. The hallway felt eerily cold in the hot summer's night. The light, being already on, hardly made my descent to the kitchen less terrifying. My feet shattered the silence as I struggled to creep as quietly as I could. I was so afraid, and the sweat from my body glued my clothes to my skin. Mom, I don't want to scare you with describing what was in the kitchen, but I'll tell you best of what was there. A small creature, about a foot high, stood before me. It was pitch black and beady yellow eyes. This is the only way to describe the appearance of the creature, Mom. It smelt of a mixture of vegetable oil and that paving stuff that they put in the cracks of roads. It gave off this sound like a crackling fire and constant murmuring whispers. The creature made me afraid, Mom. It was fear incarnate. This creature drove a stake right into my soul, making me cold and writhe in true darkness. While I watched this thing, it stared me down and opened its mouth, which was invisible at first glance. Its mouth was simply a hole full of razor-sharp teeth, and it snickered as I gasped at the pure horror of the scene. As quickly as it opened, the creature's mouth closed, and it turned its gaze over to its right. I hadn't noticed her, Mom. I hadn't noticed Dino. Dino, our poor hound, lay directly in the center of the kitchen underneath the countertop. A large butcher knife was nestled gently between two of her ribs. Dino whined one last time as she took in her last breath and died a painful death. I didn't know what to do then, Mom. I had no control of my body at that time. I cried. No, I screamed while tears fell from my eyes. I didn't know what else to do, Mom. I couldn't help it. That's when I heard them down the hall. Again, Judy's door and your door was open. Oh, God, Mom, I was so frightened without thinking about it. I ran into Judy's room. Judy was dead, Mom. I found her mutilated, but I know you wouldn't want details about how your daughter was killed. Let's just agree that she had not stood a chance. I had no time to grieve. I had to check on Dad. Strangely, the light to your room was on, so I didn't need to go too far inside to see Dad lying on the ground. In a disturbing way, 2 butter knives were loaded, GD into his neck. Mom, I don't know how that was done. You were not in the room. You weren't there. Why weren't you in your room? Did you hear it coming, the footsteps? Did you honestly think that running to the basement would be the best answer? I knew immediately. Mom, I knew you were down there, trying to escape the evil that was upstairs. I ran down the stairs, hoping to beat the whisperers to you. I found you in the family room, Mom. The light was off. I found you in front of the TV. You had gashes in your head and your legs. You were losing so much blood when you saw me. You screamed so loudly. I didn't understand, but then I saw them. The whispers had deed me to you, and they were chanting, "Kill her, kill her. We must kill her. We must key lines her. Kill her, kill her." They were chanting at me. Mom, they were telling me to kill you. They were telling me that you had to die. That's when I looked at my hands. They were covered in blood, Mom. Blood was staining my new nightgown. Blood was running down my arms. I was holding a knife from the kitchen. When I looked back up, the whispers were gone, and at Washington, it's just you and me. I turned on the light and smiled. You screamed again. I advanced you, raising the knife in my hand. I told you to never go into the basement. Mom, why didn't you listen to me?